Hello, my name is Mark, and what I'm going to do in this little video is my technique for a timing belt change on a Mazda B2200 motor, a 2.2 liter, and consequently this technique will also work on a 1995 Kia Sportage 2.0. They are both made by Mazda. They are virtually the same, so if you own either one of them, what I'm going to show you will still apply. So let's get started. I've removed the air cleaner, and as you can see, there's no emissions equipment on here. I took that off years ago. And the carburetor that's on here is actually a Weber carburetor. My old one was giving me trouble when the truck's computer kept going out. The motor was running rich. So Weber offers this carburetor specific for these motors with an adapter plate that bolts right on, and it has all the stuff you need to hook up the linkages to the carburetor, and it works really nice. I'm really happy with it. And I'm also going to pull out this radiator and replace that along with some hoses, since I got it all out there anyway, and it'll make it easier to work in there. I've got the radiator out and the shroud is gone, the fan shroud, and I also removed the fan and the bracket assembly that holds it to it, and the alternator I just simply removed or loosened those two bolts and swung it out of the way. There was no real reason to take that out of there with all the wires attached to it. And the bracket for the fan is sitting over here, and there's 4 bolts that hold that on there. There's one right there, there's one there, one up there, and there's one right there. Hopefully yours won't be covered with grease like mine is. And then there's the bracket on top up there that the alternator swings on. I didn't remove that, there was no reason to, so I just left it attached. And what I've done now is, I've already done it, I removed the 4 bolts on the top cover, timing cover there, and it's just plastic and it just pops off just like that. And down below the bottom half of the cover there's 2 bolts that hold that on there, and I've already removed those, and that just simply removes and comes off. Now on this bottom pulley down here, it's held on with 6 bolts. And that's one of the bolts right there. I've already removed them, and this just comes right off. You don't need any special tools or anything. It'll just, well, mine did anyway, it just fell right off. That's all there is to that. And after you do that, you can remove this bottom half of the cover. Let me put this thing out of the way here, put it on the ground, and this just comes off, lickety split, and you can see the 2 bolt holes right there. It's a little dirty. And what's left is this little flange that goes like that, and you can see on there's a little keyway. It only fits one way. It's right there. And let me show you how this fits on the pulley that I just moved off. You can see that notch right there. And that makes it pretty nice that you can't mess this up. And that goes on just like that. Everything lines up. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some paint at some different locations around this to mark where everything is at. I've read about this, and friends of mine have told me about it. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to use it. I'm going to put some paint right there, a little white paint mark. I'm going to put some paint right on the belt itself. Then I'm going to put some paint right on the motor right there, and that'll line everything up where it's supposed to be. I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to put some paint right on the belt and right on the gear right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of that gear. Now this one right here, that right there is your water pump, so there's no real reason to put any marks on that thing. This right here is an idler wheel, and the one next to it is your tensioner. Now if you look back inside there's a spring, and what that spring does is it pulls tension on that idler right there, or that tensioner, and it makes sure that that belt stays tight. If that bolt should ever come loose, the spring's going to be there to make sure everything doesn't go flying apart. So what I'm going to do is unloosen that bolt right here. I'm going to loosen the spring, take it off that little pin sticking out there, and then I'm going to remove the belt. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer all those paint marks onto my new belt. Exactly. tooth for tooth, and when I go to put it back on here, it's going to be just like the original belt that come off here. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Before I remove this belt, I wanted to show you the paint marks, and you can see there I got paint right there on the gear and right across the top of the belt, and I got paint right back there right on the engine itself. So now I know exactly where everything lines up in relation to that location. And down below I did exactly the same thing. I put a paint mark right at the bottom at two places. I got paint right there on the gear and on the belt and right on top of it there, and I did the same thing on the other side. Now on the table here directly in front of me I have my new belt, and this is my old belt that I just removed. It's got the paint marks on there. There's one right across the front there, and there's a paint mark on the front of that belt, and down at the bottom there's those two other marks there. And I have my belt attached between two nails here, kind of stretch it out a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll simply place the belt over one nail there and the other one over the other one, and I'll make sure all the teeth line up all the way around. That's very important. And then I'll transfer those paint marks onto my new belt below on all three locations. It's important that all the teeth line up whenever you transfer this over so it matches it perfectly. Alright, I've transferred the marks over. It's my new belt right in front of me here. And it's important that when you mark your belt that you have your mark, you know what direction it came off. So I got a little mark right in the front of that belt there, and there's nothing on the back. This tells me that when this came off the motor, that was the front of the car right there. And that's important when you transfer those over so you know exactly what's the front and what's the back. You don't want to put it on backwards like this because you might have more teeth on one side than you have on the other, and that's going to throw everything off. I've installed the new belt. I lined up all the lines. I got my line on top up there, perfectly lined up where my old one was. Down below I got the two other lines lined up exactly where they were. I've reinstalled that spring to that little peg right there, and I've tightened up the bolt to the tensioner. And fingers crossed, everything's ready to go. Now I just have to put the whole thing back together. Alright, here we go. I got it together enough to get it started. Got all the pieces back on, got a new radiator, put a new thermostat, some hoses, and she's ready to go. Let's see what happens. There we go. We got ignition. Nothing flew apart, nothing came out, and spewed oil all over the place. No antifreeze leaking. Now it's time for a road test. There you go. Hope that helps some people. It's been fun. I thought I'd share a tool tip with you before I go. This is a air ratchet wrench I picked up at Harbor Freight. It's a 3/8, they're professional grade. And I wish I would have bought one of these a long time ago because they're really nice to get into tight places where normally you're busting your knuckle with a standard socket wrench. And I always thought you needed a big tank to run one of these, and it turns out I'm running just a 6-gallon tank, and it's more than enough air to remove 3 or 4 bolts. And the compressor is a little 110-volt compressor. The compressor will go up to 125 pounds, but I only run the tank up to 90, and that's what the tool calls for. So if you don't have one of these and you want to save your knuckles for 20 bucks, it's a gem in my toolbox now. I'm always going to have that thing around. So there you go, little tip for you.